We'll also discuss the communication process and some best practices for presenting as well as public speaking. We'll also learn about being a good audience member, the idea of listening skills. So let's talk about why this matters. Why is public speaking so important? First of all, it has to do with life skills. Even if you're at an interview and you're presenting to one person or 5 people interviewing you, it's useful to be able to communicate well, which is something where public speaking can be helpful. It's useful on a personal level then. When you're talking to a friend, a family member, being able to communicate your thoughts clearly is important. Being able to do so in front of a broader audience can help you get your message out to even more people. Because of that, you'll be doing public speaking in school very often in your classes. It could be an individual presentation or a team presentation, but it's important to learn public speaking skills so you'll find that in academia, in the classroom, your professors will often have you prepare for that by having deliverables and assignments that do require you to have some sort of speaking in a public or group setting. It is also helpful for your career. We talk so much about how recruiters are looking for communication skills. In your career, you often have to communicate, and you have to do so in front of a larger group. Now, it starts with an interview. While sometimes an interview will be one-on-one, sometimes you have to go to an interview where you'll find yourself in front of multiple people you could be working with in the office. It could be someone in a similar role, your soon-to-be supervisor, other team members on the project, other supervisors. Having more than one person in the room doing the interview is common to help give a good objective interview. So you'll find yourself public speaking just to get that job. Then opportunities will arise in the workplace. In some roles, you will need to be able to present information you're finding in your job to others, and to do so in a persuading way. Having strong presentation skills will help you in that manner. A good example of how public speaking can be important in your career. When I worked for AT&T, I was just coming out of college and I was new to public speaking. It was something I had done in the classroom and practiced a little bit, for assignments, team projects, but not something I had done so much in my career. At AT&T, I was required, even at the first day of sales training, to present to all these new people who are also in the sales training process. If you're uncomfortable with public speaking, that won't go so well. Later on in my career, my store was doing well. I was, a manager that was doing well for the organization. So I was asked to share some of those best practices with my colleagues, other managers from nearby. And that could be a very scary thing to do. And I was very nervous. Being able to practice public speaking and having public speaking skills, being able to communicate clearly, helped me in that process. So let's talk through some of the best practices for public speaking. Today we'll focus on 10 key areas. The first is the audience. They matter. We'll then learn about telling a story, how to build rapport through your presentation. We'll talk about building clarity and how to help people see what you are saying. We'll discuss the concept of key takeaways and how to practice design, not decoration. We'll talk about how slides can be a resource but should not be a script. We'll also talk about how you should make the sale, that confidence matters in your presentations. Along with that, we'll discuss body language. And finally, the most important takeaway for our presentation today is to practice, practice, practice. So when you're presenting, try to be conversational. Let's talk about some of the differences between public speaking versus conversation. In some ways, they're similar. Both should be organized logically. Both should be tailored to their audience. Both should adapt based on feedback. If you're speaking with someone in a presentation or a conversation and they look really bored, probably need to pick it up a notch, right? If you see people looking confused, this look like maybe you need to find a new example or way to clarify. And you should also be purposeful. Make sure you understand what your message is and keep directing the conversation or the presentation to that. Now, some of the differences. When you're public speaking, you're going to be more planned and structured. Whereas if you're talking to a friend in a conversation, you might not necessarily have a plan or a presentation to accompany that conversation you're having with your coworker or your friend. In that sense, it'll be a little less interactive when you're public speaking. I still think it's important to try to engage the audience in many ways. asking them questions and seeing how you can relate their stories to what you're discussing to help engage them so it's more meaningful. But it won't be as interactive as a one-on-one conversation with your friend where you're bouncing ideas back and forth and able to really talk to one another. The language in public speaking will often then be more formal because of this planned structure, and the delivery, of course, will be a little different. Okay? When you're public speaking, you might be in front of a large group in a lecture hall, as you might see in a classroom. It could be in front of a large group at your workplace or a smaller group setting. It's not going to be that one-on-one conversation you might have on a bus with a coworker. So let's talk about our first best practice for today. The audience, they matter. It's very important to understand who you are speaking to so you can try to be more relatable to them and talk to them at their level. It's important to include audience participation when possible as well. You want to have questions or activities that engage them. For example, if you're giving a presentation on business ethics, my first conversation starter with the audience would be something like, please, can anyone share any experience they've had with ethical issues on the job? That helps other people to get to share their stories and become more engaged in the situation. If you're presenting a business, you have an idea for these scissors, you want to sell these scissors, I would say something like, does anyone own one of these? Has anyone of you used one of these at home? Do you know someone who's used one of these? It helps show that it relates to them, which helps you to speak to them on their level while engaging them in the conversation. You also want to use eye contact to gauge their interest and to read their reaction. So you want to look for things like heads nodding. Again, if you see confusion, then you might want to help give a couple more examples to clarify or try saying something in a different way. If you're practicing and you're seeing that type of confusion, that's when you know you need to work on your messaging. And the lucky thing is you'll be able to try again before that formal presentation. Another thing you can do is ask if a group has questions, and you want to be careful how you ask that. Again, if they look confused and you say, does anyone have any questions? Someone might feel a little nervous about speaking in public, speaking in front of the room, and asking you a question that they might think is dumb or doesn't sound like they're knowledgeable, and then they're nervous. You'll notice that sometimes instead you might ask, what questions do you have? Or you might ask them, to give some clarifying information on what you've just provided. Now, can you summarize that last topic for me? Can you give an example of this concept for me? That'll help make sure that they're really understanding the messaging. Now, when we talk about understanding your audience, one good thing to keep as a rule of thumb for presentations, written assignments, is that you're talking to an 8th grade level. The American public reads at an 8th grade reading level. So if you assume that you're talking to an 8th grader when you're sharing information, you'll make sure the information is simple and that it's clear. That you're not saying something that your audience is unfamiliar with, and assuming that they already know. For example, I've seen speakers come in and speak to my business classes, and they're so helpful and wonderful, but they'll use acronyms from the field. Even something that you think everyone may know, they might not. And suddenly they're losing the messaging because of that acronym that's so common in their workplace that they might not even realize they're doing it. For example, something like the term CEO, the Chief Executive Officer of a business, again, is a very common acronym, but you don't know who you're speaking to in the room. If we assume it's an 8th grade level, that not necessarily sure the 8th grader knows who the CEO is, we're making sure we're giving the right amount of context. Okay? Now, if you know your audience and you know that they know that information or they're familiar with your workplace, then you can be more relatable by using that acronym, using that terminology, and you can move forward in a more positive way. You just want to be careful. If you're not sure of your audience, make sure you're giving them enough information that they don't lose your message. Our next best practice is telling a story. It's this idea of rapport building. Tell the audience who you are, and you relate to your audience through storytelling. It's more memorable and engaging, and it has a more personal appeal. So I can give you a lot of information. If I'm starting a new business and I'm excited about telling you all the features, that's wonderful. It's unlikely you'll remember it. If I can tell you how I came up with the business idea and the story behind it, you might be more excited. Telling them, here's why I'm here today. I'm here today teaching you about public speaking and presentation skills because I like to help my students learn. And a big part of that learning process is learning to communicate what you're learning in a meaningful way. So being able to be here in front of you, I can share some tips and tricks. But it's going to be more memorable if I tell you my story. So again, going back to my first presentation in the workplace, I'm at AT&T, I'm at this sales training, and I'm very excited. I'm with a bunch of new sales representatives. We're away at the special hotel. We've had training all week. I'm with my team, and I am excited to do a role play about a sales opportunity with a customer. I think, hey, I'm pretty outgoing and I'm sociable and I can get in front of this group and I won't be scared. I got in front of that group and I was bright red. I was so nervous. And I'm practicing with my team of 4 or 5 people and everything's going smoothly. And I'm thinking everything's going to be great. Why practice? Let's goof off. Let's get in front of the group and I'll be just fine. Well, I was not just fine. You never know how you're going to be until you're in that situation. And so what I learned from that is that I should have practiced as much as possible before I got in front of the group. And I should have been practicing public speaking as much as I could, so I would have been more comfortable then with the group. To this day, something I do, going back to our audience matters and this idea of storytelling, I try to make a point to talk to my audience if I can to help with those nerves. Part of why I was so nervous was I didn't know any of the faces I was staring at. I knew my teammates, I felt comfortable with them, but I didn't know the people around me. So if you walk into the audience, you shake some hands, you say hello, you start talking to them, you're building rapport in a more personal way before you start public speaking. It can help make you less nervous. Now, clarity is a really big part of presentations and speaking in public. A big way to help gain clarity is to provide a roadmap to state your objective very clearly at the start of the presentation, usually within the first 90 seconds. I like to call it a roadmap because it's kind of your plan of where you're going. You're telling the reader, you're telling the audience, here's what I'm going to tell you today. A great example of that is in our presentation. I told you here are 10 best practices, and now we're walking through each of those 10 best practices together. It's like an outline, and it helps let them know what to expect up front so they can look for that information and keep it more clear and organized. You can go use the tool where you tell them times 3. You tell them what you're going to tell them, an outline, kind of key pieces you'll be talking about that day. Then you actually tell them that information, and then you conclude by telling them what you told them. If you do that, you'll be sure to get your message across in a clear way and to leave the reader or the audience with some nice clear highlights and the things you want them to remember. The little dog saying, I don't know, man, what if I never find out who's a good boy? If you're telling them, here's what I'm going to tell you, just make sure you actually tell them that information. And then it's helpful to kind of just summarize the key highlights from your presentation so that you're leaving them with the information that they need. They know what to expect up front, so you're giving them that information, and then you're telling them what's important to take away from your presentation that day. It can be helpful to give your message in a visual demonstration because you'll generally find that about half of your audience are more visual learners. They like graphic representations of the information you're trying to convey. There are some really useful tools to help visualize data to make it more meaningful. One is pictochart.com and the other is tableau.com. And these are great tools to visualize data. There are many others out there to help you build some really neat infographics like the one you see on the screen here for Facebook. Okay, and then here's a simple chart, just to help get the information across in a meaningful way. You can have a lot of data and all these fancy charts and graphs to help give the information. You need to make sure that you're doing it in a way that's easy to figure out. Again, for that 8th grade reading level, that they're able to look at it quickly. And if you can visualize some of it, it can have a bigger impact. Here we're seeing, wow, there's a lot of users of Facebook and they're trying to use the US population as a way to kind of benchmark that and help illustrate just how big that number really is. Now, this is one of my favorite best practices. It's the what's your point key takeaways. Make sure that during your presentation or in your writing for each paragraph, for each slide in your presentation, that your key takeaway is very, very clear. Visuals state what they are illustrating. So I'm giving you a table showing you a 20% profit increase. I'm going to say something as a key takeaway like, our company is doing very well with over 20% profit increases year over year. Okay, that way I'm not just showing you the data, I'm telling you what that data means and why it's important. If you're not sure what the key takeaway is, the message you're trying to convey for each slide or each paragraph even of a written assignment, you need to go back and think about whether or not you really need it there. In the consulting field, just going back for one moment, we used to do this as a kicker at the bottom of the slide. You know, there'd be a nice little square down at the bottom here, and at the title of the slide, we'd actually use the title to be really clear on the message we were trying to get across. So that's something that can help you. You know, think about the message of that slide and make sure it's clearly indicated on it. You want to be careful though. So another best practice, you want to practice design, not decoration. Okay, everything you say in a presentation doesn't have to be on that slide. You know, the goal in the presentation is that you'll be not just reading a script off of the slide, you'll be using it as a resource. So you want to try to deconstruct to make your point more simple and more clear. That means you should aim for about 3 to 5 bullet points at most on a slide, along with some type of visual representation of your point, and then you can add to it through the conversation you're having with the audience. So let me show you some tips on visual presentation. You want to think about a billboard. You know, what would a billboard look like? That's a good way to think about, you know, how you can get your message across in a more simple way with less information cluttering the screen. Images can be a really powerful way to do that. So going to something like Google Images or taking your own images and adding them can help make your message more powerful. You don't always have to have words to accompany that visual. You also want to think about the typography. Okay, what fonts you're using. Those matter as well. You know, if you're going to be using consistent fonts, if you're going to be using different fonts, that there's a reason for that. Symbols can be really, really helpful. You can use a symbol library, or you can use infographics. They're a great way to visualize some of the information. So instead of just saying this is good, you can see a little thumbs up. And that can be a helpful way to make it more engaging and to give the same information without having as much written content. Also keep in mind, as I mentioned earlier, you can visualize data in a way that makes it really beautiful. You know, so Tableau.com, Pictochart.com are both resources for that. You can see some really nice ways to do that on the screen here. There's some beautiful diagrams that you can create. This just shows you some examples, some of the diagrams you can make with the data. And so really neat stuff. You also want to make sure the structure stays visible. Okay, so landmark information. You know, here we were talking about, I'm just going to go back here, 6 key reasons, key ways that you can make your slides kind of more powerful, more meaningful, and focus on the visual presentation of the slide. Using Prezi is a great way to kind of storyboard that. Really, you want to make sure you understand what each slide will be, and on each slide really helping to make sure it's outlined in a meaningful way. You'll notice for us, we see the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we saw them introduced at a higher level before that. Now, a big piece of information to remember when you're creating these slides, we're trying to help communicate a message, but we don't want to put the entire message on the screen. Have you ever not answered an email before? You look at your email box, you check them, you see 10 messages, and you don't read half of them. You don't want the information on your screen to be like those emails you're not looking at. If you have too much information, you might be burying the information that matters. So you want to make sure that your slides are a resource, not a script. You want them to be engaging, you want them to catch the audience's attention, but you don't want to provide this so much information that you're actually turning around, as you see this gentleman doing, and facing the slide and reading word for word. Your audience can read your slides. Okay, they can get your key takeaways. You're there to help provide some extra illustrations, more information to expand further on those slides to have a more engaging and interactive public speaking demonstration instead of just having everything on a slide they could have read at home. Okay, it makes it more meaningful. So don't hide behind your slides. Don't stare at the screen. Now use them as a resource, and the more you practice, you won't need to turn around and look at those slides. Now keep in mind too, I always joke, if you're facing your slide, Your rear end is what's facing the audience. So not only are they going to have trouble hearing you because you're sending your voice in the opposite direction of the crowd, but if you're nervous talking in front of a crowd, aren't you more nervous with them staring at your behind? Let's talk about best practice number 8, making the sale. Confidence matters when you're public speaking. It's like selling. Okay? You need to be likable and believable so you can be credible. The audience is going to determine whether or not you're really confident about what you're talking about depending on your confidence level. So we are confident. Okay? We need to be convinced, we need to believe that you know all the information and that you're a credible source of that information in order for it to be more engaging. If you're up there going, I think, the audience is going to feel that uncertainty, and it might just be that you're nervous. If you're staring too much at the slides, you're unsure of your words, and you don't have the confidence you see Superman has here, you could lose some of your audience members. It's going to be less engaging, it's going to be more unclear, and you're going to run into a situation where they might really disconnect from your message because they simply don't think you know as much about what you're talking about as you probably do. Body language can help with that confidence piece, okay? But it also helps to engage your audience. It's really important to learn that nonverbal communication is a big part of conversation. So things like eye contact, okay? Make eye contact with your audience. It'll help to engage them and help you to be more credible. If you're too nervous about looking someone directly in the eye, you can use that age-old trick to just kind of look at their forehead. If you're looking at their forehead, it'll look like you're looking at their eyes and maybe be a little less distracting. You do want to be mindful then of your body language. Okay? Take confidence, stand straight with your shoulders back, okay, head up. Fake it if you need to. It will become more natural, but you at least want to give the appearance of that confidence even if you're feeling nervous. Your body can also influence your mind. So if you dress nicely, wear a suit, make sure that your head's up, make sure your shoulders are back. You take a pause and breathe instead of saying and kind of slurring your words. That will help a lot in displaying the confidence we talked about. And you'll also help when you have that nonverbal communication to continue to relay that confidence. So you see here on the screen, something as simple as having your arm across your chest and you're thinking like this, you're blocking your lips so it can be harder to hear you, and it can make you look like you're not open to communication, or some people might think you're lying. Sunglasses, they might think that you're hiding behind something. Here, just crossing your arms, even if it's because you're cold, if your arms are crossed, you can look more hostile or aggressive or maybe even insecure. You see the person with the arms open, they look more interested. Okay, so it's really important how you're standing. You can give off an impression. We want to make sure we're standing tall. We want to make sure that you have your feet kind of generally together, not too tight together. You're standing in a way natural to you, and that you're not using your arms too much. If you're going like this, it can distract from your message. If you're using your hands and your arms in a way that helps communicate your message, for instance, saying, I have 3 things I want to share with you today. Number 1. Number 2, number 3, now we're using our hands to help provide a message rather than distracting from it. One tip I like to give, if you're having a hard time kind of standing straight and you are using your hands too much and you feel like you don't have that confidence, you can hold a pen behind your back instead of sticking your hands in your pockets, which is what you see this gentleman doing. It can make it look like you're uncomfortable. So put your arms behind your back and, hold a pen or a clicker or anything that just kind of distracts your hands from moving too much can help make sure that you're not using your arms too much and that you're still looking confident. Now, our best practice number 10 is our last best practice we're discussing today, but it's the most important. The more you practice, the less nervous you'll be. Going back to my story, I worked with my team a little bit. We got our sales role play together. We got in front of the group, and I thought I was ready, but I just wasn't. And I could have been if I had been practicing more, not just with my team that day, but in general. Talking in front of groups I wasn't familiar with. Sometimes professors recommend then that you might take a theater class to get better at public speaking. So it'll force you to memorize some lines, get in front of other people you don't know in an audience, and share information. Or you can just take more opportunities to give speeches or even talk more in class or on the job so that you're practicing. You can always practice a presentation in front of a coworker, a family member, a peer, a friend. You could practice in the mirror. You can practice in the car. Okay, any place where you have a moment to just kind of recite the information is a good way to practice. Now, listening is an important part of communicating as well. When we talk about public speaking, you want to be aware of things like outside distractions, okay, personal concerns, information overload, and prejudice. Your audience might have other distractions going on. They're there listening to you in the classroom setting, but they're worried about something that happened at work that day. They might have a personal concern. Maybe they got into a fight with their significant other, and that's distracting them from paying attention to your message, no matter how valid it may be. It could just be information overload. And you want to be careful with that, with the simplicity in your conversation, the simplicity in your presentation. If you give them too much information, it'll be like those emails you've deleted today. You want to make sure that you're giving them the right information and not so much that you're losing their attention. You also want to be careful. Your audience will have some prejudice in some cases. They might have their own opinions or experiences with something that you're discussing. Now, for example, when I started working for Deloitte Consulting, the first client I had was nervous about working with me because they had some prejudice. They had prior understanding and a prior conception about what it was like to work with a lawyer. Okay, so I had to walk into that public speaking opportunity, that interview I was having with a couple of the clients, knowing that prejudice had existed and addressing that prejudice. You see Sheldon here, he's saying, no, I'm listening. It just takes me a minute to process so much stupid all at once. You don't want to give this impression. Okay, you want to make sure that you're aware of these communication barriers that exist. You still want to make sure that your audience and you are listening when you're a part of that audience. To help with that, you want to monitor how people are reacting. You also want to avoid jumping to conclusions. You want to listen with your eyes and your ears and listen for the main points. When you're a part of an audience, you need to be a selfish listener. Okay, try to find the information that matters when there's too much of it. Okay, try to avoid jumping to a conclusion based on one or two pieces of information that the person provided you. It's good to look at multiple sources. You also want to think about your listening goals. Why are you at this presentation? Are you listening for pleasure, for information, to empathize, or maybe to evaluate? Whatever it might be, you want to understand your goals and try to be a good active listener. That means you need to listen critically. It doesn't mean harsh. You don't need to attack the person who's presenting. It means that you want to listen to evaluate the quality of the information. If they're making a strong point, where's the data to support that? Where is it coming from? Is it a valuable, credible source? And you also want to think critically and make judgments about the conclusions being presented. Ask questions. It'll help you to make sure that the information is accurate and credible. I want to provide you some more resources here. First of all, on the screen, you'll notice this last piece, tools and templates. Whenever I'm giving a presentation, I try not to start, remake the wheel. It's very helpful to get some information about how to use really great presentation tools like PowerPoint or Prezi like I'm using today. But if you start with a template, there's tons of templates for presentations on slideshare.net, and there's lots of templates for Prezi. It can help you to start with a baseline to build from, to build your story in a way that's going to be more meaningful to help get your message across. If you're starting from scratch, it can be really hard to kind of create, here's what I want to address, these 3 key areas, and make sure you create that quickly in one of these tools. By starting with a template, you can fill in the information in that template. It should be a quicker experience for both PowerPoint and Prezi. Now, for either of these, it can help to do what's called storyboarding. So before you jump into creating the presentation, it's like doing an outline you might do for an essay. Here's my overall point. Here are a few reasons that support it. Here are some facts and data I'll use to connect with those to help support my point, and then build out the presentation once you have an outline of what's going where and what the key takeaways are for each piece of information. Now, the reason you want to practice, and pay attention to some of the tips I've given you today is to avoid having a meltdown. And the worst case scenario is you go and you're excited about a new opportunity to share some really important information, and then you're unable to do so because you're just so uncomfortable. Here's a great example of that you'll see today. So imagine you're giving the presentation of your life and something goes wrong. You'll see Michael Bay on the screen doing just that.
Director and producer Michael Bay.
How is everyone today? My job as a director is I get to dream for a living.
Michael, you're known for such unbelievable action. What inspires you? How do you come up with these unbelievable ideas?
I create visual worlds that are so beyond everyone's normal life experiences. And Hollywood is a place that creates a viewer escape. And what I try to do is, as a director, I try to the type is all off, sorry, but I'll just wing this.
Tell us what you think.
Yeah, we'll wing it right now. I try to take people on an emotional ride, and
The curve? How do you think it's going to impact how viewers experience your movies?
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank Michael Bay for joining us.
So we saw there Michael Bay, a famous movie producer, really having a meltdown. He said the teleprompter was off. Most of us won't have a teleprompter with the information. But then he's being asked it's basically a simple question. How will your films look on this new type of curved television for Samsung? And it wasn't about not knowing the information. He was just nervous. You might be an expert in your field. You might be great at what you do. But again, if you can't communicate that, you can't share that experience with others. So this is a great way, practicing public speaking, to avoid the type of meltdown you saw happening to Michael Bay. He's still going to do some great work. He has done great work. And avoiding that type of meltdown will help him to share more of that work with a broader audience. So here, to help avoid a meltdown, you'll see absorb on the screen. Being aware, breathing, stillness and silence, options, response, and again, that breathing, that's so important. Let's start with being aware. First of all, you're aware that something goes wrong. You can start to have this kind of spiral down panic we saw happening with Michael Bay. Technology goes wrong sometimes. The internet's down and your Prezi's not working. You forgot your presentation. The computer all of a sudden runs out of battery on your laptop. You can't connect to the projection screen like you thought you would. You can help with that. You can bring extra cords and extra batteries and bring handouts to help you prepared for anything that could go wrong. But in some cases, if you're not prepared for those could be meltdown instances, you might start to have this panic. And if things aren't going the way you plan them to, that can just cause panic even if you have those backup options. So being aware that something went wrong is kind of that first step. It's easy to say not to panic. Okay, the best thing you can do is to breathe, to avoid panicking. We've all been there when things go wrong and you start to panic. Taking that breath can be the difference of whether or not you start spiraling. So breathe. Just take a moment. Okay, your brain needs a bit of oxygen to work. You also want to practice silence. That can be unnatural for some of us. You don't have to comment on what's going wrong. And it might be that it makes more sense to say, we're having some technical issues, and so we're going to keep moving forward, and here's how, to let the audience know what's going on. But in some cases, the audience may not even realize that you skipped that slide. They haven't seen that slide before, and they didn't see that you practicing your presentation. So if you can just move forward calmly, they may not even know. If you practice silence, you take a breath. Instead of going, trying to think about what to say, if you just breathe, smile, and take a moment, it can give you time to figure everything out. If you want to say nothing and act casual, that's great. If there's something going on where you're presenting with a group and one person misses their line, if you just move forward again, it's very unlikely the audience will catch that unless you draw attention to it. You also want to think about your options. Okay? Quickly brainstorm what you can do. You can just move on in a lot of cases. You can make a joke. I love making a joke because it lightens the mood and it engages the audience, it connects with them again. So you can laugh and say, oh, don't you just hate it when the internet goes down? The internet, is so reliable these days. Haha. Most of the people in the room, they've been there. They get it. You can also skip it. It's okay to just move forward unless you really, really need that information. And sometimes you might just have to say, I think that I missed the slide. If you just give me a moment, I'm just going to check my notes. I think I want to share another piece of information with you. Turning off your ringing cell phone is also an option to help remove the distraction. If you do have notes on index cards, you have some material nearby to help kind of jog your memory if you are having a little bit of a meltdown or you're unsure of what to do next. One really helpful tip is to put a water bottle next to your notes. You might notice people doing this now, some of your professors or in the workplace, and I bet before you didn't even realize this was why they were doing it, you might have just thought they were thirsty. If you get lost, walk over to your notes and pick up that water bottle while you glance at your notes. If it's a water bottle, you can actually unscrew the cap, and that'll give you a few moments where it looks like you're taking a sip of water to hydrate. You're actually kind of collecting your thoughts or checking your notes. And that is a great way then to move you forward. Sometimes you just need a moment to recollect your thoughts, and the water bottle will give you that moment. Then you want to respond. Okay, choosing your preferred option, put it into action, and just take a breath again. It's going to be okay. Think about it if it worked and evaluate your audience. Throughout this, make sure you remain calm. Well, ultimately, you can celebrate a public speaking victory. So there are a lot of great resources like that to help you in presentations. You'll notice here there's also a link to 10 common mistakes as well as ways to practice in your daily routine. Okay, we'll click on the common mistakes now. Some of the mistakes people make. A small scale gesture. This is T-Rex arms. I love this so much, not very much. When someone holds their arms in close to their sides, their wrist bends, these types of hand movements, the amount of motion that you're using can help express a message. So using too small scale of a gesture can actually hurt that message. See an example of that on the screen. Okay, the large gesture can have a bigger, more meaningful impact. Low energy is another big mistake that people make. It's one of the ones I push a lot in presenting. Maybe you practice so much or you're just tired or you're nervous, but the low energy can hurt the confidence and make the presentation a lot less engaging. Let's take a look at an example.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the Great Depression, passed the the tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression.
So that's a great example of what I would call a low energy presentation. As you see, the audience is not responding well to that. That sort of monotone, kind of just presentation isn't going to excite anyone about the information that's there, and it's not going to engage them and build that rapport. So it's really important that you bring your energy, even if you're tired, even if you're having a hard day, even if you don't want to be there. Bring that energy and let your personality shine through. The more you smile and let yourself kind of shine through the presentation, the more relatable you'll be, and hopefully the more exciting the audience will be to listen to you. Okay, have that kind of high energy.
Old men forget, yet all shall be forgot, but he'll remember with advantages what feats he did that day. Mention our names, familiar in their mouths as household words. Harry the King, Bedford and Exeter, Warwick and Talbot, Salisbury I stay to the ending of the world!
That is a lot of energy. It will certainly make you a little more excited about your presentation. Another big mistake that students and people in the workplace sometimes make is just not preparing enough. Okay, it's very important that you prototype, which means that you make a presentation and practice. Share it to various groups. You can make sure your messaging is clear. If they're confused or they're not getting the message you were trying to convey, you know you need to make some changes. Okay, even if you don't agree. You gave a presentation, you thought it was phenomenal, and they're saying, I don't love that picture, or font is too small. If one person's saying that, it's worth paying attention to. It's a red flag. If they think it's too small, someone else in your audience on presentation day might feel the same. You also want to make sure that you're practicing, and we've really been driving that home this whole presentation. The more you practice, the more comfortable you're going to feel, even if you have some kind of panic situation like we saw with Michael Bay where something's not working, you'll feel more comfortable because it'll just flow naturally because you're so used to giving that same presentation. Okay, deliberate practice can help you through that. You also want to think about data-centric presentations. You see on the screen here, it says, oh my God, can you please just tell us if we'll make the deadline? Be careful how you're sharing information. Having data to support your argument is certainly helpful in terms of logical reasoning. You want to provide that data in a way that makes it more engaging, more meaningful, which is where PictoChart, Tableau, any tools that create infographics can be more helpful. You still want to tell a story with that data. It can be so much more. Now, playing it safe is another mistake. Okay? Taking no risk is the greatest risk of all. You really want to make sure that you're taking risks and that you're giving a presentation that gives the information you want to give, and don't be afraid to do that. You also want to make sure that you're not avoiding vulnerability. It's okay to be vulnerable to the audience. It says here, Dwight, determined worker, intense, good worker, hard worker, terrific. Who would you rather hang out with, Dwight or Pam? Yes, she's a little more vulnerable. This is Pam and Dwight from The Office, a show some of you might like. Yeah, she might be a little more vulnerable, but she's herself, and that's the person you want to hang out with, the one who's going to be more fun and exciting and not be afraid to take those risks and really get the group involved. Another mistake is just taking yourself too seriously. It can be more fun. Make a joke, lighten the conversation. You're speaking in public, and yes, not all instances call for it, but in most cases, you should be smiling. You should have fun with it. It's exciting information you're sharing. You should be excited about it and help make it fun for the audience to feel that way too. Too much material is definitely a mistake that you should be concerned about. We talked about that idea of deconstruction and how you design. Okay, oh my God, is he still talking? If you see your audience looking like the audience on the screen, it's too much information. So it can help to make sure that you're keeping the information interactive and try to think of ways to say it in less words, and that'll hopefully make it a little clearer and quicker. 2 minutes for every slide. Here it talks about some of the ways you can keep that slide short and sweet. Rushing is another big mistake people can make in their presentations. Choose your words wisely, put your brain in gear before you put your mouth in action. If you know you talk fast, remind yourself to take a breath and slow down. When you see a comma, you see a period, pause in those moments. It's important not to rush through the material because that means that it won't be as credible and some people might miss your messaging. You want to have measured, rhythmic speech. Okay, so there are 10 common mistakes that might help you. For more information, you can go to speakfearlessly.net. Now, our last piece of information today, you can find some tips for how you can actually incorporate practice into your daily routine. Clicking on this link, and we talked about how important it is to practice. Here are some ways you can make it part of your daily routine so it's easy to do. In the morning, you consider any meetings coming up. Think about questions you need to ask and what points you need to make. Then, you want to make sure you're reading the news, stay informed, and sharing your views. The reason you want to pay attention to what's going on around you, you don't want to walk into a public speaking event and there's something big going on and you have no idea and someone's asking you a question about it and you're just unsure when it's something you really should have been aware of. Just giving a quick glance at the news will help you to know if there's anything major, especially if it's relevant to the information you're sharing in your presentation. Then you can practice. Okay? Practice the way you're going to stand in your presentation while you're waiting for your ride or while you're standing in the mirror. Then during your commute, practice talks or singing to exercise your voice. Okay, you can think through the presentation to help practice it. Now, let's say you're answering emails, try to include a more human touch, add humor, be curious, share personal stories. That'll help you practice to do the same in your presentation. During meetings, you can practice by using silence instead of verbal fillers. Okay, think about the nonverbal communication, how you're sitting. Okay, avoid things like and like. Instead, take a pause. Speak with passion. Be excited about the information you're sharing and expressive. A monotone conversation like the one we saw earlier is not going to be as engaging. Now you want to use metaphors. That's a good way to practice that storytelling ability we talked about being an important part of public speaking. Anytime that you can relate to something or share a story to help illustrate something, that's a good way to practice doing the same when you speak publicly. Walking to lunch to help build some energy and speaking with passion and enthusiasm with your friends and your colleagues in general will help make that more natural to you. You can also practice using expanded gestures during regular conversations with colleagues. Again, during meetings, you can tell stories to illustrate points and add impact. You can paraphrase what others are saying. And you can use hooks to grab attention. These will all help you to practice to do the same in your presentations. Now we're later in the afternoon. You might be at a standing desk or a regular desk, okay? Just stand up. It'll encourage that good posture. It'll push you to practice that stance. And it might take away some tension as well as sustain your energy. When you're unsure of what to say again, practice using silence to gather your thoughts. If you need to, take a water bottle and unscrew the tap so you have a moment. Then during your evening commute, you can think about those talks and meetings and even practice what you plan to say. Using stories and metaphors to help describe information throughout the day to your family, your friends, and your colleagues will really help. Finally, once you find that quiet time, you can help build that story, what your presentation will eventually be, and get creative with it. Acting out characters using that theater aspect can also help to make your presentation more engaging as you can help be more expressive. So that can be a good way in reading to your children to make you better at public speaking. Even if you're reading on your own, read out loud. If it's to yourself, that'll help get you ready to speak in public. Daily practice of some of those techniques will really help make them more natural for you. Okay, we want to master public speaking. Hopefully those tools will help you to do so. Now we talked already through the tools and templates that exist. I hope some of the best practices I've shared with you today, as well as some ways to avoid a panic, thinking about that meltdown and preparing for what might go wrong so you can avoid it. Okay, practicing and talking through some of the mistakes you could make and ways to avoid them, as well as ways to integrate practice into your daily routine will help you to become a better, more effective public speaker. Thank you.